Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Tasha's Tales. Today we are joined by Adrian. Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name's Adrian Ellis. I live in Barton Town. I'm married to Carol. I have two children, both mature. Amy, my daughter, she's an ICU nurse at Hull Royal Infirmary. And George, my son, he's no longer with us. I'm afraid he's in heaven. He took his own life in 2021. So I'm a bereaved by suicide father.
I just want to say to anyone listening, I think this is going to be quite an emotional episode because what we'll be talking about is going to be difficult. Firstly, Adrian, I can't even tell you how sorry I am for your loss. As a parent myself, I can't begin to imagine what that loss must be like for you. However, equally, I wish to use this platform to raise awareness, to continue with George's legacy and do what we can on this side. And like you say, till we meet again. So,
Yeah, yeah,
I
definitely.
really appreciate you coming on. I know I can't even begin to imagine how much courage it takes to be on. So, since we're here for George, would you like to share a little bit about what you've been? Well, let's talk about George then. Tell us a bit about George, what he did,
Um,
how old he was.
okay, so George was 24 when he passed. He left school at 16 and he said, Dad, I want to join the army. Now, at the time, the war in Afghanistan was going on and there was lots going on and there was lots of troops been killed. And my wife and I really didn't want George to go, but we was persuaded by him to sort of sign the papers. And to be fair, it was the right thing for George to do. So he joined the Army Foundation College at Harrogate for a year's course at the age of 16. Now, as a young 16-year-old male, that was a challenge for George because he'd become accustomed to sort of having his own way, being able to have the mobile phone, designer clothes, and then to be told you can't have your mobile phone, you can't have this, you can't have that until you do the things that the army want you to do. So once he got over those initial hurdles, the army became a way of life for George, and he spent the first year at the Army Foundation College at Harrogate, and he then joined the Yorkshire Regiment, 1 Yorks, and Warminster became his home for the next 5 years. Now, leading up to sort of George joining the army, George was a free spirit. He would always challenge. He challenged certainly at school and wanted to know why he couldn't do things. But his circle of friends was incredible. It was worldwide. He was the guy that if there was a party going on and George Ellis wasn't the party, don't bother going because it's not worth going to it. He was there. He would always support people. He didn't stand for bullies. He would always be a protector. As we took George and Amy to some of the countries that a lot of people never go to Kenya, to Sri Lanka, and they have seen poverty as well. As a young family, we went to Mallorca to the same hotel for 7 years. And we got to a certain age, Amy and George, and Carol and I said to them, where would you like to go? Disney or Kenya? And they actually chose Kenya.
Wow.
And sort of flying into Mombasa and getting onto an old rickety bus and going through the shanty towns that are just made of corrugated iron and seeing young children making shoes out of tyres and roundabouts. And I think that kind of thing stuck with George and Amy, and certainly with myself and Carol, how fortunate we are in our lives. And yeah, he was the guy who just everybody wanted to be round.
He sounds like the
So
most beautiful soul, Adrian. I bet you and Carol, I bet he was a credit to you both.
yeah, I mean, we don't get me wrong. He wasn't an angel. He was, he was very challenging at times, and we fell out at times. But as you know, Natasha, as a parent, all you want to do is protect them, and it's all because you love them.
Absolutely.
You know, and the things that are going on in the UK and around the world at the moment, there's some terrible things in Southport, at Stockport rather. It's awful. And I promote, being kind because I think the world needs to be a kinder place. So George left the army at the age of at 21. He said enough's enough, and he went backpacking to Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam for 4 months. And he came back and he got a job in the telecoms industry, which was funded by the army. And he did that right until he passed. A year before he passed, he met Katie, who was the love of his life. It was a beautiful relationship. They did things together that youngsters don't do. They would go, he would buy her flowers on a Friday. They would go off and see the sunset and just like a barbecue. And it was just, we thought he was the happiest. In fact, I do believe he was the happiest he'd ever been. Friday, the 30th of April, 2021, should have been a great day for us because my wife was picking me up from the Humber Bridge where I worked at the time to go to Filey on the East Coast for a weekend that we'd booked in 2020, but we couldn't go because of COVID. So we'd waited 18 months. Carol picked me up. We made our way to Filey, and we've got a little dog called Charlie Bucket. He's a miniature schnauzer. And we arrived about 7:30. We unpacked the car. We had some cheese and biscuits, had a glass of wine. And at 8:31, I got a messenger message from George, and it said, "Dad, where's the tablets?" Well, he actually said, "Where's the drugs?" But it means tablets. That's a youngster saying, "I'm going to kill myself. I'm sorry, and I love you." Now, that was at 8:31. Now, at 16:44 and at 4:30 in that afternoon, he'd been messaging me, joking about how much he'd been paid, what his plans were for the following week. And a 3.5 hour period had gone from being on such a high to, I'm going to take my life. And you look at that message and think, this isn't real. This isn't real. And we was trying to get a hold of George, and we couldn't. Now, we've got cameras front and back, and we got hold of his friends, and one of his friends, they call me Big A. All his friends call me Big A. And then one of his friends called Ben, said, "Look, Big A, don't worry about it. We'll go sort it out. You have a nice weekend." About 9:10, the guys arrived. The gate was locked. The side gate was locked. They climbed over and found George unconscious in the back garden. Now, as I said, we have cameras front and back, and all we could hear was crying and shouting and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, as they tried to perform CPR on George whilst on the phone to the paramedics. I'm screaming down the camera microphone, "What's going on? What's going on?" I rang my neighbour. She came across, but the lads wouldn't allow her into the back garden. I understand now why. We saw ambulances, paramedics arrive, an air ambulance arrive, and we saw George being taken in an ambulance. And his friend who found him, Ben, said, "I can't call it, Adrian. I can't call it." And we immediately made our way coming back home, and I got a call, and it was an 01482 number, and I just had this feeling it was Hull Royal Infirmary. And this guy said his name, whatever it was, I can't remember now, but I'm a consultant at Hull Royal. And is that Adrian? Are you George's dad? And I said, yes. And he said, "Are you aware of what George has done tonight?" And I said, "Well, I'm aware he's tried to take his own life." So he said, "Well, if you can make your way to the resus department at Hull Royal and we'll have a chat." That was his words. We arrived at Hull Royal Infirmary at approximately 11:25 p.m. I tried to get onto the front, but the security guard wouldn't let me. I had to go round and we had to find some money to pay. That was the worst thing on earth, but we did what we had to do, and we made our way into the resus department. We gave our name, and we was taken into this little room, and the door opened up, and there was a table with a box of tissues on it. And there's Carol and I sat there, and a couple of minutes passed, and the door opened up, and a consultant walked in, and he said, "My name's whatever it was. This is the nurse. I'm sorry, but I've got to tell you, George has died." And we just absolutely, fell to pieces, shouting, "He's died, he's died. Not our George." And I wanted to see George. I had to see him. And so we were taken down this corridor, and there was a curtain across this room, and they said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yes." And the curtain came back, and George was laid there, fast like he was asleep on the bed. And we sat with him, and we held his hand, we kissed his forehead, and we just said, "Why, George? Why?" And that's the answer. That's the question I still ask myself today. Why, George? Why? And we sat there for about 20 minutes, and we left Hull Royal Infirmary with a brochure that was given to us by the hospital. And it said, "Ring this number at 9 o'clock in the morning." We went to my sister-in-law's because I expected the house to be a crime scene. And my sister-in-law came back with us, and the house was in darkness. There was no police there. There was nothing. And I expected to find a note from George, but there was nothing at all. All there was, when we opened the back door, he'd actually hung himself. And the dog lead was hanging from the hanging basket bracket. And the next thing I knew, we said, how do we tell Amy? Amy was in Manchester. That's my daughter. So we got hold of a friend who'd done his degree with Amy. We rang him. We told him what had happened. He made his way across to the other side of Manchester, and he broke the news to Amy. By 3:30, he'd brought Amy back to our house. And for an hour to an hour and a half, we were safe in our little house, knowing that how popular George was, the news would soon break. We went to bed, but I don't know what, we just probably cried all night. And then the next day, the first thing we have to do is Carol and I both got our parents still alive. They're in the 80s. So how do you tell your grandparents that your grandson is taking his own life? So Carol went with her sister to see her parents, and my daughter went with me to see mine. And yeah, if the worst thing on earth was knowing that George took his life, the second thing was breaking that news to my mum and dad and his grandparents. Now, obviously, I said to you we was given a brochure to ring this number at 9 o'clock. And 9 o'clock Saturday morning, we rang this number, and it said, "We're closed for the weekend. This is bereavement services. We're closed for the weekend. Ring back on Monday." Now, Monday was a bank holiday. Now, we didn't have any contact with any support agency till the Tuesday morning. It was horrific. And sorry.
There are no words to give comfort or solace, first of all. Second of all, what an absolute letdown by the services.
Yeah. And then on the Tuesday, we got a call from Humberside Police to say, "We understand your son's taking his own life. We've just had a call from the coroner." The police didn't do anything about it because there was a communications failure, shall I say, when the call was made to the ambulance service, that it wasn't passed on to the police. But that's history,
I'm so sorry. It's not very often I'm speechless, but I am genuinely speechless because for a parent to raise two healthy, beautiful children, bring them into this world, give them everything, and then for them to go before you and to go this way, I can't. I have no words, Adrian, but we sit here now, we think about George, and was there any inclination that he was suffering with poor mental health or he was struggling with anything? Was there any indications?
He'd said to his friend about a year ago he was down, but that was it. Yeah, George actually didn't see action, but obviously he'd lost 5 colleagues in the army to suicide, and his best friend took his own life 10 weeks before George did. He was backpacking out in Australia, a young man called Damon, and George said at the wake, "Enough's enough. we're not going to lose anybody else. But 10 weeks later, George did the same. Now I'm going to move on, but one of the and we can come back. But ever since I lost George, I had, as a parent, and I don't, you don't understand, and I don't want you to understand, because it's the most horrific thing ever to suffer. If he'd have died in a car crash, or he'd been something else, you can live with that. But when I've never been angry with George, I've been really upset, because obviously he wasn't thinking right. He was in a very dark place that time, and we was the last thing on his mind. But if he could see the tears, the love from thousands of people around the world, because he's missed so much, even 3 years and 4 months on now. But I need to tell his story, and we did radio interviews, TV interviews, because youngsters, and especially veterans and the young population, need to understand that we only get one chance in life. And yes, we'll all have things that move us off track, whether it's relationship issues, money worries, employment issues, family fallouts. But we only get one chance at life. And 1 in 4 of us suffer with our mental health. And if we're honest, a lot of people, for a split second, may think about taking the life, but they never do anything about it. Yeah. But if somebody is really down, if people open up about their emotions, there are support networks. I'm a trained mental health first aider. I've done lots of courses. We can get people through that critical period, and tomorrow's another day.
Yeah.
But I've started doing talks in schools, which last about an hour, with a PowerPoint presentation, all about George. And it's really hard hitting. It's very, very emotional, but it needs to be to get through to our youngsters that you do only get one chance in life. You may want to die at that moment in time, but again, tomorrow's a different day, and you really don't want to.
I always say we've all got a duty of care to do our bit to look after the people around us. So what support did you receive, Adrian, after you lost George?
Well, we had support from Hull and East Yorkshire Mind. We reached out to them. So I had a counsellor for a period of weeks, same with Carol, and same with Amy. And that was over the telephone. Carol and I at the moment, we still pay for counselling ourselves, and that's face to face, because that peer support isn't available, or it is available, but it's an 18-month waiting list. Also, the mental health system is broken.
I was reading somewhere that said that suicide is one of the biggest causes for male deaths under the age of 35 and 50.
Yeah. We lose 200 teenagers a year to suicide. That's more than road traffic accidents, knife crime, drugs. And it's the biggest killer in under 35s. Absolute fact. And if we all talked more about our emotions, we would absolutely reduce the suicide rates. People don't choose to die.
Yeah.
They find themselves in a particular place at a particular moment in time and can't get out of that whatever it is. So they choose suicide.
There's something about the terminology that we use as well. I recently came to know that we're meant to say death by suicide rather than committed suicide.
Well, that's right. That C word, is a swear word, because it's not a crime anymore. And it's all about education. And it really does grate my teeth when I hear that word being spoken. But it is education.
Yeah? But again, if we're not speaking openly, and if we're not being transparent about the word suicide, the term mental health, how do we progress? Hence why, this podcast of mine, whether it reaches one person or 10 people, it doesn't matter, as long as someone out there is learning something from it, as long as someone is mindful of what they say, how they say it, I feel like that'll be my job done. And obviously, credit to you, Adrian, for sitting here and living through the most traumatic and the most tragic not just the days, weeks, and months of your life. I feel quite honored and privileged that you said yes to my message to be here.
I mean, I can, after we finish, I can send you I don't know if you've ever seen the video of George's funeral. And it was tastefully done because we was in COVID at the time. And we were allowed to have 100 people in the church, but we could have filled it with 1,000 people. So we had it that we had the speakers outside, the service went out, and we had it professionally videoed. And it's emotional, but it is very nice as well. Yeah, I will send you it.
And I will link it on the episode as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. But the latest figures between 22 and 23 show that 5,668 people died by suicide in the UK. Now, that's a 6% increase from the year before.
Wow.
And the other statistic is there's only 6% of the UK population that has had any form of mental health or suicide awareness training. Every death by suicide is estimated to cost £1.7 million. Now that we shouldn't put a price on life, and I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to say this is what the statistics say. But if more money was invested, because
Prevention.
that's right.
Yeah.
The work I do is because I'm like many other people want to get to a zero suicide society. Now people might laugh, but if you don't aim for zero, we're failing.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, it's everyone's business, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
also first aid mental health trained, so, I'm fortunate enough to have some understanding and some knowledge, but that doesn't mean that I stop here. It doesn't mean that I've done it now and I move on. It's
Mhm.
it's my business to gain more knowledge, to speak more and to speak to other people. How's Carol and Amy?
Yeah, I mean, Carol counts still as well. We all have good days and bad days. Some days we're sat here and the tears just absolutely flood down the face because we may smell a smell, we may see something on television, a song might come on, and his pictures around the room and around the house and everything because he'll always, he's not in a drawer. Do you know what I mean? We talk about George openly because he is our son, and as long as while I'm still here, his legacy will always live on.
Yeah.
I mean, Amy, my daughter, she's an amazing nurse, and I'm not just saying that because she's my daughter, but she in Hull Royal Infirmary, it's like between life and death,
Yeah.
and she has been honest at times when tragically some people have come onto that unit because they've tried to take their life. And she's had to say to the managers, this is too raw for me. I can't deal with that. And they have been really supportive. And that we're very grateful for that. Because nobody understands. Nobody
No.
can people want help, and we have had so much support from our local community. We have George's Day every year because he loves
So
sport.
tell me when's George's Day? Let's put this down.
So George's Day is on Sunday, the 25th of August this year.
The 25th of August.
Yeah,
Okay.
at Barton Town Football Club. I'll
Yeah.
send you a poster.
Okay,
But
brilliant.
it's the third one that we've done, and it's a day where we remember George through sport, but promoting mental health and suicide awareness. And we raise money for Hull for Heroes, which is a charity based in Hull, which looks after veterans. And I've become a team member there because the ultimate aim with Hull for Heroes is to build a veterans village. Because when George came out the army, he struggled because he came and lived back at home. But when you're in the army, you're told his work was all around routine, structure, orders. Now, when you come out, what do you mean I've got to make an appointment to the doctor? What do you mean I've got to make an appointment to the dentist? When you're in the forces, you can just go, because these decisions are made for you. So the more definitely needs to be done in terms of a transition period from military to civilian life.
Yeah,
And going back to
absolutely.
the village that Hull Heroes are going to build, that will be where people who are leaving the armed forces can go to the village for a period of time in that transition period before moving into their own house. So it's a bit like a social care type thing
Yeah.
from the military, you know.
But it's very much needed, isn't it? It's a massive service that's missing. There's a huge gap, and I'm quite taken back that that's not already in place for veterans that are risking their lives and representing the country, yet
Yeah.
there's no support, there's no care package for them.
Yeah. The government, and I'm not going to talk politics because we've just had a change of, but there's many, they all say the same. You know, there are different organisations out there waiting, but there is no care plan put in place when somebody leaves the forces. You know, like a support worker, you know, checking in on them every couple of weeks. You know, if everything's fine, that's great. But once you leave, that's it. You're out. You've gone. And I've spoke to many Army personnel, Navy, Air Force. They all say the same. Once you're out, that door is shut.
Are there any other charities with regards to George that we can support? Or is
So
that the main
obviously,
one, would you say?
well, Hull for Heroes, you know, Hull for Heroes and Hull and East Yorkshire Mind. They're the two charities that helped us, you know, and we're giving back to them. I also promote Papyrus, which is the young person's charity. And when I do my talks at the schools, I promote Papyrus because there is a 24-hour dedicated hotline for young people. These people are trained advisors because the hardest thing for anybody is to say, "I'm sorry, but I need help."
Yeah, of
You know,
course.
that's the hardest thing, to pick up that phone, do an email, do a text, you know. But I would always say, you know, that's the hardest thing. Once you've actually reached out, it becomes a lot easier.
What advice would you give to grieving parents and families and friends who have or who are going through similar experiences as to you?
We're all different, you know. We're all different. When we lost George, I used the fight or flight scenario, and either one is right. There's no wrong, there's no right. But I chose to fight because that's part of my getting over the healing process. I mean, I'll never forget George. You know, I shall grieve until I pass. You know, but I would urge anybody who is in the same situation as I is to talk about it. You know, because don't allow those emotions to build up. I know that I am vulnerable to suicide. The facts state that as a bereaved by suicide parents, we are very vulnerable to suicide. But we talk between Carol and I. You know, I talk to people about it. I absolutely thrive on helping other people, but at the same time, I need to look after myself as well
Yeah, you're the
because
foundation.
yeah, my batteries do get low at time, and Christmas is not a good time for me. Last Christmas was probably the worst Christmas since we lost him. So we put in place a care package. So in December, the first week of December, we're going to Tenerife, Carol and I, for a week to recharge our batteries. So we're there for that Christmas period. But yeah, reach out, talk to people. Don't be afraid to show emotion. Showing emotion isn't a sign of weakness; it's a sign of strength.
Is that a perspective you've always had then, Adrian, or is that something that you've been forced to acknowledge and have that perspective?
I've always been a people person, and I always tried to be a positive person because I worked in retail for 40 years. I was store manager. I was the leader of people. But yeah, I mean, did I ever think I was going to be talking about mental health? No. Did I ever think that we would be talking about suicide? No. But did I ever think George would take his own life? Absolutely not. But suicide can affect anybody, absolutely anybody. And you've said, Natasha, we've all got a part to play.
I
So
think, you know, it's been so lovely to speak to you, Adrian. Your strength, your resilience, your eagerness to help others really comes through. And no, like I said earlier, no amount of words can kind of express my gratitude, but also my solace and sadness for you. I've tried to really hold it together. I'm quite an emotional person, and before starting the recording, I said to you, I'm an amateur. It's not like I'm a professional podcaster or whatever. I'm a social worker by profession. People are my favorite. Mental health is something I'm really, really passionate about. I really want to advocate for it. And I really commend you for what you do, Adrian.
Thank you.
And I appreciate all your hard work and your dedication. And I'm sure George would be really, really proud of you and all the work that you're doing. Because you're fighting. You're fighting not just for George, but you for yourself, for Carol, for Amy, and for all those veterans and people that are struggling out there.
Yeah,
And I,
absolutely.
and just speaking to you, like I said, that positivity, I feel it in my heart. I'm just really, really sorry you had to go through something that nobody in this world should ever go through.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, do you think George knew he was only going to be here for a short period of time, knowing that his death would put me on this path? I don't know. Do you know
You
what I mean?
never know. Yeah.
No. So,
What are kind of your coping mechanisms then, Adrian? Is there anything any charities or anything else that you can think of before we wrap up that might you think? Because I just don't want to miss anything out. Just want to make sure
mm,
that everything's out there.
well, obviously, I think I've missed this out, but with Hull Heroes, Paul Matson, the chairman, got in touch with me and said, we want to start a military men's talking group and we want to call it GEO. Now, George's nickname was GEO,
Right.
and GEO would stand for Get Emotions Out. So I'm a facilitator for GEO. We have 5 or 6 groups. We've saved over 10 people's lives since GEO was formed. Part of my coping strategy is to promote mental health, to talk about George, because he was that character, and I want to help other people. Natasha,
Mm.
I like walking, I like my holidays, and I like my gardening. And I now know when I sort of need now to take a step back and sort of recharge.
Before we part, I just wanted to say, like I said, I am not an expert in the field. If I've said anything unintentionally to cause any upset, I'm really sorry. I just hope, during our chat, there hasn't been anything. I'm just really mindful of kind of the
Yeah, no,
emotions and the terminologies and things. So I just hope that I haven't said anything inappropriate or
no,
anything that would cause upset.
definitely
But
not.
no, I do really appreciate your time. What we'll do is, if you send me all the links and information that you think would be really useful to add to the description and for
Yeah,
when I send it out to everyone, that would be
yeah,
really, really helpful.
no problem. And if you
Please
obviously
do. Yep,
and you can keep me informed of how it's going and everything, that'd be great as well.
absolutely do pass my regard to Carol and Amy as well, because I can only imagine that they are a source of support for you as well.
Yeah. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.